In this past year, I've noticed a few changes, I'm sure we all have, in how people are living in the world as they return from the pandemic. For instance, this summer I attended our denominational meeting General Assembly. I did it virtually this year. And Susan Frederick Gray, who's our UUA president, Unitarian Universalist Association president, she stopped. She was giving her president's address. And she walked out onto the podium, I guess stage area, to show us her shoes. And she said she would no longer be wearing uncomfortable shoes. She was wearing tennis shoes. She'd made this decision during COVID. And I applaud her decision. See, I've been wearing tennis shoes or sandals since COVID started. I've come to realize it's not about my professional image. It's about my comfort as a person. It only took a pandemic for me to realize this. We each are entering the mostly post-pandemic world in our own way with things that we may be doing differently. Each at our own rate, with newness and normal mixing around together in our lives. For some of us, wearing a mask in a crowded indoor space is a new normal. And it is a normal that may become a way of life. We realize that our true effectiveness isn't predicated on what we wear on our face or what we wear on our feet, but what's in our minds and hearts. For some of us, fist bumping rather than handshaking or hugging is a new normal that may continue indefinitely. And respecting each other's choices of how we interact with one another, some still keeping distance, not being ready to touch, and others wanting to hug, is an important component of this new normal world that we live in. Really respecting each other in our differences. And so I've been thinking about this new normal. I've been wondering how I've been impacted by my choices and how my choices are impacting others. And this led me to the story of the Callaloo Soup that you heard this morning. Callaloo Soup is a funny thing. As it turns out, I was at a Rotary meeting Thursday night, and the man across the table from me started talking about Callaloo Soup. I just read about it a couple of days ago. I'd never heard of Callaloo Soup before. He talked about how as a 4-year-old, his aunt was trying to get him to eat it. She put down this green, slick, thick soup in front of him, and he said, "What the heck is that?" He was not going to eat it. It was too strange. It was too vile looking to him. But she pushed and she prodded and perhaps even made a promise or two about something later on that she could eat. And she persuaded him to take just a little bite. And it was delicious, even if the okra was a little slimy. He has loved that soup ever since, and his wife makes it for him on very special occasions, his birthday, for instance. It was just so odd, having just read this story, to hear my friend talk about Callaloo Soup not 48 hours later. And I thought, wow, maybe I should explore the metaphors of Callaloo Soup and what it might offer to the people here on Sunday morning. So as we return to this new normal world, I began thinking we're kind of like the people in Trinidad after the hurricane. For those of you who were here during Hurricane Andrew, you might know what I'm talking about, how people came together. Maybe unsure of how to engage with each other initially, how to be with one another. Before the disaster, whether we're talking Andrew or COVID, we may have been in our own silos, comfortable in our own silos of religion, culture, race, gender, work. Perfectly comfortable, even if our silos were in one way or another kind of a bad fit. A patriarchal, white supremacist culture with gender norms that weren't comfortable, that didn't fit exactly right. Silos with abusive managers or unsafe working conditions. Silos where gender differences were not always acknowledged and or work often didn't provide a living wage. These were the normal. And now we enter a new normal world. And one of the things that I see has changed is that this new normal world seems to include more time where people are self-reflecting, a little more self-aware, and more aware of those people around them. And because of this reflection, some of us are unwilling to return to the old normal, the normal of silos and a culture we may have been blind to. A culture, a new normal culture today that's resulted in people participating in the great resignation when they find themselves in a situation that is unsafe or abusive. Or they feel ready to move on to something new in their lives. One other thing about this new normal is it seems to include many of us fighting to hold on to the rights we thought were already a done deal. Reproductive choice, being able to teach about the racist history and the cultural norms in our country, an affirmation of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and gender fluid rights and recognitions. Things we thought were a done deal. And here I am. I'm probably breaking the law by telling you this, by making you a little uncomfortable, by acknowledging a white supremacist culture, by talking about gender issues in public. As many of you know, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed legislation that aims to regulate how schools and businesses address race and gender. The state's latest effort to restrict education on these topics. The law, which is called the Stop Woke Act, prohibits workplace training or school instruction that teaches individuals that individuals are inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or not. That people are privileged or oppressed based on race, gender, or national origin. And that a person bears personal responsibility for or must feel guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress over actions committed in the past by members of the same race, gender, or national origin. The law says this training, this teaching, this awareness that we share is discrimination. Am I, today, as I share with you, am I discriminating against you or anyone else? Am I breaking the law? I mean, UU Miami is a business, isn't it? So wouldn't this law regulate what I say in the pulpit, in the classes that I teach, in my counseling with you all? Does this law make our free and responsible search for truth and meaning less free? What does Callaloo Soup have to do with all this? Well, I guess I would ask this. Who among us is willing to step outside their comfortable silo, perhaps even breaking the law, to be the elderly woman who finds a huge pot, boils some water, and appeals to people around us with a gentle invitation to share something of themselves, to build a future, a world that nourishes us all? But then I ask you, would you come to a pot and offer metaphorical cumin, garlic, thyme, crabs, dasheen, okra with other people? Maybe people from conservative political groups or evangelical churches, people who hold very different ideas, beliefs, traditions than yours. I met with a couple of people on Friday. The chair of the Board of Trustees and the director of an interfaith group and diversity organization called MCCJ. We had breakfast. And we talked about how we could bring diverse faiths together. And I mentioned that when I was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, right after the 500-year flood that devastated downtown and many of the residences in the city. And I said, both evangelical and progressive religious groups worked together to help rebuild and heal that city. I personally worked with evangelical ministers to provide pastoral care to residents who'd been traumatized. And I worked with evangelical and progressive groups to provide housing, clothing, furniture for those in need. We worked together to muck out houses, churches, businesses, helping them to return to some level of functioning. And I worked with evangelical and progressive groups through the Lynn County Emergency Management Organization to develop a plan to cope with future emergency events. And we worked together. We developed relationships with one another, and we did this together for over a year. And we helped a lot of people, made a real difference. But after that year, And after all this work, and after all these relationships we built, the evangelicals pulled out of the pastoral care project and stopped working with us to provide supplies for those in need. Because the progressive clergy offered a prayer. Nothing special, just something like, oh, Great Spirit, we call by many names, thanks to all these people who've put in such effort and time and energy to make this world a better place, to make our city a better place, something like that. At one of our meetings, the evangelicals felt somehow betrayed because they felt we should have known that they could only pray the prayers that are particular to them in their place of worship, and that to do otherwise was an affront to their religious tradition. I don't know what was really going on. I couldn't say if it was they felt they needed to return to their silo, that much of the work had already been done, that they really were getting tired of working with people that were so different from them. But they shut the door and turned the key, no longer willing to work with us. Now, let me tell you that before the flood, the white evangelical groups, well, they didn't participate in any interfaith work, discussions, worship, social projects, none of that. They were comfortable in their silos. And I told my friends this story, and then I ended with saying, my brain goes weird places. I wondered aloud if the faith leaders in Miami could make Callaloo Soup together. And they're like, what? What the heck are you talking about? And then they said, I think we have the answer. We just need a disaster, and then everybody will be together. And I was like, really? Really? So, how do we make Callaloo Soup without a disaster to motivate people to come together, to share with each other their songs, their stories, their traditions, to be in relationship with each other? So I want you to do something for me for a moment. I want you to think in your own mind, in your own experience, if you've ever seen a time or experienced a time when diverse people work together to create something out of nothing. If you can come up with a time. If you can recall that time, who was the person or persons who appealed to people with some gentle or persuasive invitation to join the project? Were the walls, did you see them begin to break down between diverse groups? Did you see that people, when they're working together, creating something new and wonderful, begin to share more than just the project with one another? Maybe there's personal or spiritual or cultural stories. Did you see people change when they participated in this project? I have a microphone up here. You see that? I just didn't put it there just for decoration. I want to ask a couple of you, if you're willing, if you've had that experience where you had a diverse group of people come together and create something, if you could share just a little bit about that with us. Is there anybody here who's had to come up, Carol? Yeah, well, we've had a few people. Okay. Bob? This is Bob, by the way, if you don't know. and he works out.
I worked construction for 42 years as a painting contractor. I painted this church, I painted strip malls, I painted factories, and warehouses, and people come from all over the world in these construction groups. We all get along together. The goal is to take this earth and put a building up there, and someone digs the ditches, someone brings in the electricity, someone brings in the plumbers. These people in these subcontract groups come together, and you got a building. And we all cooperated with each other. It was a wonderful experience. I never in 42 years ever had an argument, because it was my goal for us to get along peacefully, happily, and work together to get our job done. And when we were done, we got paid.
My name's Trish, and I was a member here for 20 years. My husband and our next-door neighbor, my husband was kind of a, what would you call, naturalist, non-believer, but nature was his go-to, spiritually. And the next-door neighbor was an, evangelist. And after Andrew, they cleared our street, and they no sooner cleared the street with the saws, what do you call them, the buzz saws, then the FPL came down the street and said, thank you. But anyway, no, they really did bond after that. Not based on religion, but based on, just people getting along and working through a hard time.
My name is Carol. I feel compelled to reiterate this, because Friday was the anniversary of what we call Charlottesville, and some of us went up to Charlottesville with an interfaith group, and Unitarian Universalist in Charlottesville played a big part in counter-protesting the Unite to Right white supremacist movement that was terrorizing, literally, that town. And I put a series of pictures about this on our Facebook page if anybody wants to see them, and some captions. But what I wanted to say, it reminded me of what Rev Tom just told us. The various congregations in that community had been talking about forming a interfaith group to cooperate on things. They had talked about it and talked about it, but when every weekend the Ku Klux Klan and militias started coming to their town, that brought the groups together, and they formed, I think it was called Charlottesville Congregates, and to stand up, and the rest is history.
Carol, you remind me. If you all have time, there's a bulletin board back there that has an article on it about how this church was formed, and diverse people coming together in response to the Ku Klux Klan in Florida. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. So as you listen to these stories and to my story, what do you take away from all this? How can we live in this new normal time with all the other people around us in a way that creates beloved community? I tell you, for one thing, that I try to do for myself that helps me is I try to keep in mind all the wonderful experiences I had in Cedar Rapids while we worked together. And I try not to dwell on what broke us apart, but on what we did together, on the relationships I developed with people, and that holding on to that gives me hope. Not just hope because of one single experience, but a hope I can hold on to that helps me realize that perhaps this world can turn. And as it turns, maybe it can turn with love. But only if I believe in that hope. I believe, and I hold myself radically open and ready for others' contributions. Even if at times I look at them and I think, they're a little maybe slimier than I'm ready to be with sometimes, or maybe they seem so unfamiliar or so different. I still have to open my heart and mind. I have to create a safe space for all of their contributions. I have to be that lady with the cooking pot. My friends, I believe that this church, Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Miami, is a cooking pot. It's a safe space that we hold for all that come in our doors. Maybe some of the people that come in are a little salty, maybe some are a little spicy, maybe they bring in a little green gunk to put in the soup. But I believe here we make Callaloo Soup to nourish and sustain us as we work in this new normal for justice, for equity, for compassion, for every single person here and beyond these walls. My friends, keep bringing what you have, bringing everything you are. Invite others to join us and be the change you wish to see in the world. And we're making some great Callaloo soup here as UU Miami. Amen.